collaboration between IFCN, so the Institute for Forests and Nature Conservation of the regional government of Madeira, the European Public Law Organization that is here with us, and Fórum Oceano. And without further ado, I give the floor to Mrs. Susana Prada, the Regional Secretary for Natural Resources, Climate Change, Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change. Sorry, it's a big name. And which has honored us with her presence. Please take the floor. No.
Pois era a minha dúvida. Perfeito, já está. E este, desligo. Obrigada. Cumprimento o Sr. Secretário-Geral do Fórum Oceano, Dr. Ruben Eiras, a quem agradeço o amável convite para aqui estar. Caríssimos membros do painel, minhas senhoras e meus senhores. É com enorme satisfação que procedo à abertura desta conferência sobre um tema que me é particularmente caro. As Ilhas Selvagens são uma história de sucesso de conservação da natureza que o Governo Regional da Madeira escreve desde há 50 anos. Não haja dúvidas de que o valor da biodiversidade conquistou no país um novo patamar quando, em 1971, para proteger a colónia de cagarras em franco declínio, as Ilhas Selvagens foram classificadas como reserva, a primeira de Portugal. Hoje, exemplo excepcional de estratégia de conservação, a colónia de cagarras é a de maior densidade de todo o mundo, com mais de 30 mil casais reprodutores. As Ilhas Selvagens são de incomparável singularidade. Fauna e flora, ilhas e mar, berçário e habitats de biodiversidade única, património geológico de excepcional riqueza, testemunho de processos geológicos com mais de 29 milhões de anos. Por todas as suas características, as Ilhas Selvagens foram alvo, ao longo de todos estes anos, de diferentes estatutos de proteção e das mais elevadas distinções internacionais, provas de uma região que desde sempre definiu como prioritária a sua estratégia de conservação e o desígnio maior de proteger o seu património natural. Em abril deste ano, definimos o Estatuto de Proteção Integral para a área marinha da Reserva Natural e aumentamos a sua extensão em 27 vezes até as 12 milhas da costa, abrangendo áreas com profundidades superiores a 3.500 metros, num exemplo inequívoco para o mundo de visão e atitude de política ambiental. Agora, com 2.677 km², é a maior área marinha protegida com proteção total do Atlântico Norte. Para além da inquestionável proteção dos valores naturais, multiplicaram-se por área e nível de proteção as potencialidades do mar, para a ciência, para a economia e para a sociedade, para nós e para as gerações que nos seguirão. O território a sul mais longínquo de Portugal a deixar mais próximo o compromisso de proteção de 30% do mar português. Muito obrigada.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Secretary. So, thank you for your kind words, and also very motivating to say that the Selvagens Islands are, is the biggest MPA in the North Atlantic, and it's very important that for a competitive and sustainable economy that we have, healthy ecosystems, because those healthy ecosystems make an healthy ocean, and an healthy ocean is the basis of a sustainable and healthy ocean economy. And it's very important that the regional government of Madeira takes the lead on this. And I have a declaration of interest to do. I am Madeiran by birth, so this is why I'm very happy and very proud of this initiative. Well, but no further ado, I call then Paulo Oliveira. He is the board member of IFCN and is a long-time specialist and lover of Selvagens Islands. Like we told before, it's your wife's work. Paulo, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ruben. Good morning, everyone. A bit early, at least to Portuguese standards, as we see in the room. Anyway, Ruben, thank you very much for you and all the partners for having us here presenting this study. My role here is to give you the background information that will enable you to understand what the next speakers will say. I hope I pressed the right button. Yes. Paul Rose, a known journalist and explorer, once said, "It all started with a little bird." And it is funny to see how this story unfolds. Yes, it all started with a bird 50 years ago. And I have 5 minutes to unfold this story. Selvagens lies in the middle of the Atlantic, is a very remote group of islands. They are comprised by 3 very small islands. Together they don't have more than 300 hectares. But this image here shows one of the features that are very interesting in Selvagens, is their geomorphology. In this map over here, in this topographic map over here, you have the islands. And if you make a cut across the islands, you have this profile that we can see here. It's very interesting to see. It's a complex, a volcanic complex that comes from below 3,000 meters of bathymetry. This is very interesting from the geological point of view, but also from the ecological point of view, because in a very small area, relatively small area, you have a lot of different habitats. And Selvagens are only the little bottom part of this enormous volcanic complex. Very important from the geological point of view, but also from the ecological point of view. Okay, it all started with this bird running away from extinction. This bird was running away from being caught, being put into these barrels and transported to Madeira in these tiny little boats. While the boats were like this, everything was quite sustainable. But when the boats got bigger, the catching of the Cornish waters got also bigger, and the numbers start decreasing towards extinction. That's why in '71 we created the first nature reserve of Portugal, which limits were the 200 meters of bathymetry. But Selvagens is much more than a bird. A bird is just the umbrella. We have endemic plants, we have endemic reptiles, and we have a pristine ecosystem. And recent studies showed that we have one of the more pristine ecosystems in the North Atlantic. This created a new challenge and opportunity for us. And in 2022, we created the largest full protected area of the North Atlantic. Nowadays, this is the limit of the nature reserve, 12 nautical miles around both of the islands. All the volcanic complex that I showed you before is inside this area, what is very remarkable. Well, in finishing, what are our goals and why we need financing? everything ends up in financing. We want to preserve important pristine ecosystems. We want to improve fishing activity in the surrounding areas. We want to increase the resilience to climatic changes, to promote sustainable tourism, and as it was said yesterday, we want to lead by the example. To do all this, we need financing. We will finance ourselves through the standard ways, but we also want to have a new approach, a model of market-based conservation finance. And this is what this study is all about. Just a last word to say thank you very much for the images, to National Geographic, Luís Ferreira, Gregório Cunha, and IFCN. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo. So, as we can see in here, the natural capital that exists in the Selvagens Islands is of unique, unique value, and it has a challenge: how to be effectively preserved and protected, how to get, the finance market to finance an asset which is not very clear what could be the financial return. That's the bottleneck that we have here, and that is what also propelled to make the study that now Spiros Kovelis from the Institute for Sustainable Development of the European Public Law Organization is going to present.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Spiros Kouvelis. I'm the director of the Institute for Sustainable Development of the European Public Law Organization. The European Public Law Organization is an international organization with diplomatic status in all of the countries where it is present. We have an office here in Portugal, just outside Lisbon, in Cascais. We are present in 30 countries around the world. And our institute's mission is to find innovative and advanced ways in promoting sustainable development as a whole. So in this sense, when we were first got in touch with first Fórum Oceano and then IFCN, and were entrusted by both of them to collaborate with the two institutions and also by the region of Madeira, of course, whom I want to thank for your trust, we engaged into carrying out a study that would look into what are the needs, but also what are the opportunities for creating innovative ways to finance the protection of these islands. And when I say innovative, a protected area is very important by its own. I mean, you have all that Paulo explained, those values of geography, of species, of ecosystems that are important to humanity. But nobody is actually currently measuring what this return could be translated to in terms also of financial and non-financial things, so that it could provide returns for protecting the area. And this is what we did. I will not go into explaining what the islands are because Paulo did that very much more expertly than I could do. But I will tell you what we did. We started doing the analysis by one thing that is called the CICES classification, which means the Common International Classification of Ecosystem Services. This is created by the European Environmental Agency, and it divides the values by any protected ecosystem into three categories. The first of them divided in two. So you have the use values. When we use a protected area, we get a benefit from the direct use that we have on that and the indirect use. And in those cases, we have the direct use for the Selvagens Islands for tourism on site or remote tourism, and I will explain what I mean by this. The fisheries, in the sense that fish stocks are regenerated and kept alive through the regeneration that they have on the islands. Research programs that make it very important also to mobilize funding for those research programs. And then you have the indirect uses, carbon sequestration. It's very well known that both the coastal side of coastal ecosystems, but also the deep water in the sea, is absorbing a lot of CO2 from the atmosphere, so allowing us to combat climate change. There is a possibility of indirect use for using audiovisual footage and filming and so on the island, which also is a source and a use. Education activities, marketing for the region, the entire region of Madeira, I mean, because this is one of the jewels, I would say, in the crown of the region of Madeira. And of course, the importance for the geopolitical delineation of the EEZ of Portugal. And then you have the non-use values, like the biodiversity that is hosted by the island, the marine species, the avifauna, the flora species, the aesthetic value, but also an indicator of how an area that is so much protected, we can use it as a laboratory, if you like, to see what is happening with microplastics. Because nobody is actually throwing plastics in the salvagem, but we can measure in the water that there are microplastics, so we know what is being dispersed in the sea. And finally, we have some option values, which is, by option meaning things that we decide whether we want to use or not, like keeping it, in a coffer. And it's, for example, the use of marine and terrestrial species for pharmaceutical and other research. Once we have done this classification of the values, then we have to think that the values can turn into services. I will not stick to this because it takes a lot of time, but I will go to the services themselves. And so services, again, they are divided in three categories. One is the provisioning of services, fisheries, tourism, employment for the wardens, for research, for data collection, for audiovisual material. It's a regulating things, regulating climate change through the sink, the carbon sink that I mentioned, biodiversity conservation, and all the cultural services in terms of awareness, education, visibility of the region, aesthetic values. All of these are things that are provided by the islands to humanity, and somebody needs to account for them. Before we go into the accounting, what we did is that we looked into who are the stakeholders that are important for the islands and for whom the islands are important, what are the issues that matter a lot to both the biodiversity and humanity, which is the materiality assessment, and through those key performance indicators that we created, we cross-control them with the services and value provided and create a pattern for the valuation in real economic terms of the socioeconomic potential. The stakeholder mapping showed that we have a number of stakeholders like fisheries, tourism, island managers, the local government, the central government, all of them important stakeholders, and all of them divided in a system that shows which is the importance to the ecosystem and which is the importance to the socioeconomic values itself. And then we also did the same for the materiality analysis, so we saw which are the issues that are very material, that matter a lot, that are important for the ecosystem value, and which are the things that are important for the economic value. So, for example, carbon sink that you see on the top right, the end right, is the most important in terms here. In terms of economic value, but also of ecosystem value, fish stocks are very important as well. In terms of the ecosystem, you have the species, but you also have cultural heritage, and then research and monitoring, so on. With this, we created the full list of indicators and the key performance indicators. Just to read to you out, one of them is the total economic value produced from direct and indirect uses per employee for the ecosystem management, because every person that works for the island protection is the reason why some economic value is produced. We need to account for this, and this is what we did to the extent that the existing data allowed us. And so we wanted to look into, for example, the financial value of the overall fishing and value produced by fishing and processing of seafood, the employment in direct and indirect relation to fishing and seafood. This is a source of creating value and economic value, really, from the islands. The second part would be the financial value of tourism, the value produced by the entire value chain related to tourism. So not only the tickets that would be paid, but the whole system that works around tourism, people that will live on the island or stay in the island of Madeira to visit, people that will visit Madeira itself to find out more about the islands, but also in direct relation. We have, as I said in the beginning, two forms of tourism. One is on location, and this is very limited on the Selvagens Islands. So you do not have many visitors, but it's, I think, I understand, a pretty expensive story to go to visit the islands. But also you have everything that can be done remotely. Imagine remote sensing and images taken from Selvagens that are actually projected somewhere on Madeira, where people can actually go to a visitor center and look at those images instead of having to go and dive in the place. We have the carbon sequestration that I mentioned before, hugely important, because if we can trade the carbon sequestration rights that the ocean is taking for an exchange in an emissions trading system, that is a very important income for the islands. And then we have other things like the value of actions related to protection and management through programs that are supported and paid for research programs and so on. And then we have the employment of scientists, researchers. All of these are economic values. And the information about educational activities, which is very important as well, because educational activities are things that create economic value in themselves, besides the good things that they do for society. The overall running of the information that we had in our models showed that in its current state, the ecosystem is ranking pretty high in terms of overall ESG, environmental, social, and governance assessment on 51.79%, and this can very easily grow to more than 85% if economic activities are to a limited extent applied to what we described before, but also very high in specifically environmental, social, and governance issues. And this is the overall analysis that we did that shows how it connects to each one of the Sustainable Development Goals. To put it in very simple words, we realized that the Selvagens Islands protected area is a gold mine of socioeconomic values that can be given return to the local community also of all of the Madeira Islands. And I think that some of the economic activities that we need to look into and see how we can be developing in order to assess the exact value that they provide in terms of financial and non-financial returns are all the things that you see here: tourism and leisure activities, education and awareness raising, fisheries, carbon sequestration, human occupation, cultural heritage, vessel traffic, and public access. Just to give you an indication and close with this, I think that we can create the new ways of financing protected areas through, for example, a green bond or a blue bond or something like this that could be created that can actually provide a lot of much more value than what is paid annually for the protection of the island. I'm talking about the scale of at least 1 to 10, or probably 1 to maybe 50 of what we are paying for the protection of the islands. What we would suggest here is that we need to go into a follow-up, the region needs to go into a follow-up that we can populate all this study with more precise data so that the quantification can become very specific, and this is what needs to be provided also to the investor side so that they know how much value can be created and also in the sense of the net present value, so that we can then deploy the modern financial tools that can mobilize the support needed for the management of the islands and the deployment of economic activities, but always taking into account that we need to have a very strict, I would say, due diligence so that we respect fully the island sensitivity and carrying capacity. And finally, develop the win-win solutions for the benefit of the environment, the local community, the business, and of course the nature that is hosted by the islands. With this I will stop, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions. And again, thank you very much for this great collaboration. I think we're turning today a new page on how financing and support for protected areas as a whole, not only marine protected areas, can be seen by players globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Spiros. Okay, so we have now a very interesting overview of how the natural capital assets can be categorized, classified as a service ecosystem, and with it, and how eventually, potentially, it could be put in the financial markets. But is it really like so? And so we have now the perspective from a financier. So Frederico Serras Gago is the CEO of Front Capital, so a new fund, and also is also collaborating with Fórum Oceano. What is your opinion about this? Is this only something that is ethereal, a good intention, or there is some avenues that we can explore? Please take the floor.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and well, let me start by thanking the work that has been put forward here. As far as is very interesting methodology, and I think would be a stepping stone for attracting public and private investors, especially private investors, because it provides a standardized and consistent and coherent framework, assessment framework for the economic impact and the social impact of the Selvagens Islands. So I don't think, I think it's a good intention, and I think it's a good intention to can get a material impact in the financing, both from the public and the private sectors. To do so, we need this kind of instruments, tools, and we also need some risk mitigation factors, elements that are quite common to blended finance, to to development finance. So, for instance, in Europe, what we call promotional institutions have a long record, a good record of attracting private money into, call it frontier markets or frontier, for instance, frontier technologies or frontier sectors that are not necessarily easy to assess initially by private investors. And so here we don't have a technology per se, even though we have some potential inputs into marine biology, new materials that we can potential see here. But I think it's interesting to see, for instance, what we call blue bonds with call option features, with co-investment mechanisms that attract these private investors into this kind of investments. I also think it's important to educate investors. There is still some work to be done in this regard. Of course, public investors and strategic investors such as sovereign wealth funds, they are more committed. They are longer-term investors. They are probably more at ease with this kind of investments. And we see, for instance, that a number of sovereign wealth funds and promotional institutions such as BP France have been adhering to the One Planet Sovereign Wealth Fund initiative, which basically creates this framework for investing into conservation finance, impact investing. So I think it's important to educate investors, both the public and especially the private investors, about the impact that they can have through this financing. And so in this way, we have the risk mitigation, we have the amounts required to preserve, and then we can have the monitoring of the improvement, and we can then have a meaningful engagement with both investors and actually citizens and people, that they see the impact, the actual impact of the financing into these activities, both on the return, pure financial return aspect, and also on the preservation of natural capital.
You both addressed, instruments like blue bonds and the debt market. What about, for example, exploring crypto? So NFTs, tokens, is that an option to? We know that we are now in a market correction approach. There's a lot of speculation about the crypto markets, but they will not disappear. They will find their area. Is that also an option to explore in this case, or not?
I think it's actually too risky at the moment to do it, to base in, even if it's a minority part of the investment, into cryptocurrency, because there's really a lot of volatility associated with kind of investments, and on top of that, you're adding risk associated to this asset class. It is not necessarily well perceived or enough well perceived by investors. And you are introducing volatility into the access to financing, which I don't think is necessarily a good thing here, because you need longer term commitments, because nature has its own rhythm, so you need to get the stable cash flow pouring into conservation. Saying that, I think there are some initiatives into, for instance, blockchain, like Cello. It's a platform that is focused, a blockchain platform that is focused on impact investing, and we can have them developing blockchain protocols that then can help in some way to preserve this kind of natural capital.
Interesting.
So, uh,
Inter-
yeah.
Interesting aspect.
Yeah.
Very well. Uh, you, Frederick, you talked about and something that you mentioned 2 times. That is educating the investors. So educating investors, what is natural capital, how it's performed, and especially in island context. James, you're the CEO of Island Innovation, a very recent initiative among fostering sustainable economy in islands. And what is your perspective here? So how can we catalyze the education for investors so that they can pour in into blue bonds or other financial instruments, like for example this blockchain approach, or eventually any other products or services.
Well, firstly, thank you to Fórum Oceano for the invite to this, and I think I'm fairly new to this case study, and I was really happy, to be honest, to see a new case study, because in this area of MPAs, we've seen the same 2 or 3 case studies that keep being repeated and repeated, and to see a new project like this that really innovatively brings in so many different partners is really impressive. And I think the point about educating investors is critical. A large part of the challenges behind this initiative is a communication issue. Trying to get financiers and conservationists on the same page is not an easy job, and when you bring in the industry and governments and all these different partners for an initiative like this, it really requires interpretation between the different languages used by the different sectors. I think with the ESG sector, there's obviously a huge growth in recognition that is not just maybe a fun side project, as a few years ago people were saying. It's a serious investment opportunity. From our side, we have an international network on islands for sustainable development, and I really see a huge opportunity for initiatives like this to be applied in new contexts. And I think it's very exciting to see the leadership of the Portuguese government when it comes to blue economy and ocean issues. And we'd love to discuss how can this be applied in other parts of the North Atlantic, but the Caribbean, the Pacific. Clearly there'll be adaptations needed to local contexts in different situations. One of the interesting aspects of this project is that there is not a local community living on the islands. In some ways that makes it easier, but in some ways I think that will create some challenges of applying it into new places. But I think it's really great to see how this initiative can bridge those gaps between the different sectors involved.
Very well, thank you, sir. And very interesting your perspective, and picking up in the last 2 comments and blended finance. Yesterday at the panel that we participated, this showed around, and as you can see in here, going for a market-based conservation finance, especially going for only for the private, it's still it's still very rough. Considering what the EU mechanisms that exist in the European Union, especially the new facilities from the EIB, the new EU Invest, tools. Here there is, in fact, the EIB in the last, in the last cycle already had a natural capital financing facility. So we are in also still in a moment where some innovation can be also put and pitched to the European Commission in terms of the public instruments. How in a blended finance approach this could be done? Spiros, and then
Okay, one
Frederick.
comment on what you say and also on the educating of the investors. Yesterday we mentioned in the discussion that we had about the investment for the blue economy, the example of the Seychelles Island, where they raised a blue bond of 15 million for fisheries management, and also they did one other thing that is considered also innovative, which was a swap of debt. So it was national debt that was swapped for the protection of the area. And in this way, they created the second biggest marine protected area in the Indian Ocean.
Very interesting.
But there is a difference here, because this debt swap was coming from two directions of investment. One was state investment. Okay, so the bond was guaranteed by the state, and you had like the big brother, the state, that can do it. And in that sense, the EIB, the Commission, and all that can be providing this. The second level was the swap of debt, in which banks participated in the more in the sense of social responsibility. So it was giving back to society out of that. But here today we're discussing a different thing. We're discussing the third pillar, which is why private equity investors would invest in a bond, because they have returns. And investors want to see returns. And what we were doing through the study is that actually by investing properly in a protected area, you create returns. You create financial and non-financial returns, and a bond will depend on this. And this is the whole education thing, and I believe that through the work that the Commission is doing with the EIB, they need to provide support for that in de-risking, but not really paying for the thing, just taking the risk out, and this can open a whole new market.
Very well.
Yeah.
Federico, your
Well,
take.
I think it's possible to create instruments, financing instruments throughout the capital structure, so from equity to bonds, that can address this kind of financing needs. Of course, if you are talking about blue bonds, maybe we need to provide, we meaning the issuer, and possibly the public issuer, needs to provide some risk mitigating mechanisms. And so that's what Spiros was talking about. So state guarantee, which is something that is already being put in place in some, like by BP France and by ECO, on a thematic, not necessarily blue, but on social and green bonds. I think there is an interesting approach to attracting private equity, both venture and private equity, into this area, is by, you have two ways basically. You have the equity funds of funds, and you have the equity co-investment funds. And so equity funds of funds that are managed by public institutions like national promotional banks, like we have here Banco Português de Fomento, which is the current institution that is promotional. So we can provide equity funds of funds, so basically investing into private funds that have a thematic approach to conservation. Maybe not necessarily an entire fund, but only a compartment of the fund. So it helps the fund manager, basically helps crowding in private money into this theme, even though the overall fund may have other...
It dilutes risk. Yeah, helps dilutes risk.
And the second approach is equity co-investment facilities, which already exists across Europe. And so we can have this thematic co-investment where you have, for instance, an investment of a financing need of $1 million, and this facility will provide half or more than half of the amount required. So it helps attracting private money without forcing private investors to commit a large portion of their portfolio to this opportunity.
Very well. James, last take?
I think when thinking about how this model can be applied in other places, the involvement of private investors is critical. The Seychelles model is a fantastic model, but there are a lot of instruments that are available to them as a state that are not available in many other places. And so a huge part of the world's oceans are part of subnational jurisdictions, European overseas territories, islands that don't have that state infrastructure behind them. And so often at the UN conferences, the funding that is being discussed is coming and only available to small island states. I think this model is critical, bringing in the private investors, because it opens up revenue streams that are not always available, and that jurisdictional element of policy is really critical in looking at what instruments are available.
Thank you. So, Paulo, for wrapping up, as a biologist and the manager and having the responsibility of operational management of the Selvagens Islands, listening about this, what is your opinion?
Well, to be honest, as I told you before during the study, I am a biologist, and it's a bit difficult for biologists. We have a different way of thinking, and it's very difficult to fully understand this approach. The only thing that I can say is that we are open to keep on keep on this route, and to accept to implement any of the ideas that you will provide. You shouldn't expect too much out of me for that.
No, no, no.
The only I can do is to take care about Selvagens.
No, one of the things that I said this from the beginning, it's not very often, and this is a full compliment to the the Regional Secretary, Susana Prada, and also to IFCN, to be, have an open innovation attitude towards, finding, new ways and innovating in the way that we can, have more effective tools for protecting our valuable natural capital assets, and with that also fostering a blue economy. Well, I think we can end the panel. We are a bit, so we are within time but ahead of schedule. We started late. Thank you very much for attending. The study and the report will be further developed on. This is a starting point. Again, many thanks for the regional government for the support that is given, also for the trust that we are given, and together we will work and cooperate to keep creating value and fostering, a sustainable blue economy with an healthy ocean. Thank you very much for your attention, and have a nice day, and keep it going.
Thank you.